Welcome to Operating System Fundamentals. So we need to learn about operating systems on different devices. And we're really looking at what works on our PCs, what works on our mobile devices, and what are the most popular of today. We need to know what features they have and when it's appropriate to troubleshoot versus upgrade and how all that good stuff works. So you're going to be familiar with all the things that we're looking at today, but you should be learning quite a bit about maybe new features that were incorporated as far as when they were introduced, as well as the different versions that you may not be aware are out there. So let me get this PowerPoint started. Let's take a look at what our most popular ones are and how we interact with pretty much every single device that we've ever put our hands on. And that's going to be through an operating system. All right. So taking a look at this, we're going to be looking at not just PC operating systems, but operating systems for our mobile devices as well. And that includes tablets, phones, and phablets are going to have the same OS as phones because they are phones. They're just bigger phones. So our most popular, our biggest hitter, is going to be Windows. It is the most widely deployed OS on both desktops and servers in the entire world. So there are 3 versions of Windows that you'll be tested on and that are considered new. Now we all know that Windows 10 is a thing, it's live, it's out, you may be using it right now. But your test is only going to cover Windows Vista, Windows 7, and Windows 8/8.1. Now Vista was released in 2007, Windows 7 was released in 2009, and Windows 8 was released in 2012, and the 8.1 update was released in 2013, because we all know how well 8 went over. And you need to understand that there are some similarities between all 3 of those, and then there are some differences between them. So the similarities are they're all available in 32 or 64-bit processing versions, which means one of them can handle 32 and 64-bit applications, and one of them can only handle 32-bit applications. And we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that in depth when we get to a special place where I start covering things that I want you to know more about than what we'll go over the slides. All right, they all have a user interface, which is definitely more modern than just your command prompts. And Metro UI, or those tiles, was what was unique to the Windows 8 environment. So let's see what else Windows 8 was special and what else we can expect to see on the test, as well as what you'll be servicing in real life. So the start screen or the start menu is pretty basic across all Windows operating systems except for Windows 8. So Windows 8 had those crazy tiles which worked great for touchscreen and tablet and phone environments, but it was kind of a headache per se on the PC, which is why they came out with 8.1 to let you get that normal start screen and desktop back. Now when they say modern UI, they're literally talking about the user interface, which just means it's pretty and there are cool things to be able to touch. The live tiles updated themselves. Those were introduced with Windows 8. So those are just things that are available. Side-by-side apps are really just things that are on your monitor per se that you can click on. So in Windows 8, you had the tiles that were side-by-side, and you could actually move those around or make different size tiles. You still have small, medium, and large. Now today in Windows 10, you'll still see those tiles in your start menu. When you click on the Windows key and you have that pop-up, or per se our normal start menu, you still see live tiles that are available for customization. Now file structure and paths are going to be the same in pretty much all Windows environments where you have the C:\\. Now that's your root folder, your primary directory where pretty much all things go. And that didn't change in any of our operating systems, and that's still true today in 10. Pinning is where you can make sure that the applications that you use the most are going to be in the desktop taskbar or toolbar at the bottom of your screen, unless you've moved it. So you probably by default had Internet Explorer, the little manila folder, which is actually File or Windows Explorer, so you can open files. And if you're like me, I have Chrome pinned down there and I removed IE. I have whatever I use most often pinned in my taskbar so that I can get to them really easy. Now, live sign-in is a Microsoft thing, and it's the email address that you registered to use Windows with. And that means you can actually sign into any Microsoft program or service with this. Now, in Windows 8 and 8.1, you had OneDrive, Outlook, your Windows Phone could actually connect through this, so you could have your PC and your phone synced. One of the things that you guys might not realize is that if you have a Microsoft email address, you automatically have an Xbox Live account that's hooked up with that. Now, it doesn't mean you have a paid account, but that means that it's able to connect to Xbox services as well. So even if it's your work email, you can connect to Xbox. And even if it's your just Xbox private email, that means that there's a OneDrive and an Outlook account behind it. So all these things are connected. The Windows Store is where Windows 8 and 8.1 came out with the ability to pretty much shop apps from a Windows App Store. OneDrive, of course, is their version of Google Drive or iCloud, where you can save things in the cloud. Multi-monitor taskbars was actually one of my favorite things that was added here, because I have 2 monitors in front of me, and I'm able to have my taskbar on both of those monitors. So I will give you an example of that right now. See, let me go back. If I wanted to see the taskbar on my second screen, I'm actually going to end the PowerPoint really quickly. So if I can find the button. There it is. All right. So if you take a look at my screen, you can actually see on the bottom that I have quite a few things pinned to my taskbar. I have PowerPoint and PDF open right now, but those are not pinned, meaning if I close them, they would disappear. However, you see Chrome, I have a little K down there for one of my favorite applications, and I have my little manila folder, which means my file explorer. Even if there's nothing open, like the little K, the blue icon, there's not a line beneath it right now. That means that application is closed, but it's still on my taskbar, which means it's pinned and I have easy access to it. All right, let's jump back into our slideshow. Awesome. And let's get to where we were. Beautiful. All right, charms, not my favorite thing, and something you just need to understand that exists. They were hidden on the right side of your screen in the Windows 8, 8.1 versions, and they're pretty much like universal tools that were available from any screen that you were on. And it gives you access to what they call key system-wide functions, which means searching, sharing, printing, all kinds of shortcuts were in there. Now, they are dynamic and definitely content sensitive, meaning if you're using the search charm in your mail app, you're only searching through your email. So it's kind of like a smart tool per se. And if you wanted to search from the start screen, it would take you through all of the applications available. So that's the difference if you're searching in email versus searching on your start screen. Now, charms were one of those things that was really difficult for us to adjust to as a whole, because people were not understanding what this random thing that popped up when they usually didn't even want it to on the right side of their screen. People tried to move it and couldn't. So it's not that Windows 8 was horrible, even though most of you are probably shaking your head that it was. It's just that it was really, really different, meaning that we weren't used to any of this stuff and we weren't necessarily ready for that amount of change. So 8.1 gave us a little bit of familiarity back, and Windows 10 fixed most of it. All right. PowerShell is your command line tool, or your CLI, command line interface, whatever you want to call it. Some of us call it a command prompt, but this is where you run PowerShell commands. And you have different options of what you can put in there. You've actually already played with it with ipconfig and a few of the net and net use options, maybe traceroute as well. So arrow is what makes everything look so cool in Windows. So all the color schemes, the transparent title bars, we have flip 3D view, which is really cool. If you take a screen and you shake it, everything else will close or minimize behind it. And I want to show you what I mean by that, because most people don't know that that exists. So I'm going to take your class window here, and this is literally your Google Classroom window. And if I shake this, then everything else, there it goes, everything else on, of course it's not going to work when I have PowerPoint in the background. anyways, on my other screen, everything else has been completely minimized, so I can't see anything but this screen anymore. And I think I'd actually have to put a few other screens on that screen for you to see this work, but it's really cool. Try it yourself. The other thing that works really well here is Snap View, and that is when you take a window, and we'll see if this one works. You take a window and you snap it to the side of your screen, and it fits there, and then it lets you see what else is open so that you can snap between 1 and 4 windows. So I'm going to try it again here, and I'm going to snap this to the side. Now you see in the middle of your screen there's kind of an iridescent or see-through line, and if I let that go, then I have my other apps on the other side of my screen, and I can choose one to pull up, like this is our PowerPoint screen. So I'm glad one of them worked for me. So again, I could take this and snap it up in the corner, and it would be a quarter screen, and I could open, let's say, my file with all my PowerPoints in it. And this one's only a half screen, and I have 2 quarter screens. So it's just a really cool feature that came out that was part of the Arrow package. Now that I have all these screens up, let's see if I can shake. Oh, it worked. I'll do it again. Let me put this on half, open our PowerPoint. So if I take my title bar and I shake this window, you see that that PowerPoint window minimized and went back down into my taskbar. All right, I wasn't going crazy. So these are just some of the really cool things that came with Arrow. Live preview is probably one that's used the absolute most, and that's if you hover over a window that's minimized, you can, and I'll do it again over here. If you hover over this window, you'll see live previews here. So you see this right here is actually a live preview of me recording. And you'll see on my screen, I have my little PowerPoint, and this is really, really tiny, so if you can't see it, I totally understand. But you'll see literally a live preview of what's going on in these different windows. So give it a try yourself. Don't click on the application, just put your mouse on the application and see that live preview. If you want to see if it's actually live, go ahead and open a YouTube video of any kind. And this one's probably not the best example because we sit on the same screen for a while, but open some type of music video or something that moves around a lot, and then just hover over your browser icon, and you'll see a very, very tiny live version of that YouTube video playing. Anyways, cool stuff. Let us move on. Gadgets were what we call desktop gallery apps, and they were available in Vista and kind of died out in 7. And they were mini applications that could perform either display tasks, meaning a little notepad. They had a clock that you could have the time and date on. You could have performance monitoring and diagnostic tools on there. So there was a lot of cool little things that you could use. And it wasn't necessarily something that took off big enough that Microsoft wanted to continue to support it. So they had a gadget gallery for a long time. They decided to stop doing it at all. With the Windows 8 environment, and third-party developers kind of kept it going for a little bit, but I have to admit it's not something that we use a lot now. Now, sidebar is the Windows Vista thing where everything used to be stuck in the sidebar, meaning you couldn't get your gadgets out of there. And then in Windows 7, they allowed you to take your gadgets and put them anywhere on your desktop. All right. BitLocker is awesome because this is full disk encryption. It was introduced with Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008. So it's a security feature that again lets you encrypt a full disk protection for your operating system and all of the data stored in the operating system. And it encrypts all of your data that you have on your drive. So you do need this thing called a TPM, a Trusted Platform Module. And that is the chip per se that allows all this good stuff to happen. So BitLocker, security, Windows 7, Server 2008, both of them were the intro points, and they're still available today. Shadow Copy is something that came out with Vista and is still there. And it literally creates a backup or a snapshot of your entire system data folder and stores it locally. I would tell you that you need to be storing this to an external location because if anything goes wrong, you want an external backup that you can implement to reinstate all your data. So this is something that happens automatically in the background, or I should say can happen automatically in the background if you schedule it that way. And this is pretty much an exact copy and backup of all of your critical files and all of your essential or core data. So if you don't know about shadow copy, enable it and create a backup on a USB that you have or some type of external drive. System Restore is available in Vista and 7, and it literally monitors your system for changes to any core files, meaning your drivers, your registry, your system files, and you create system restore points, which again is a snapshot of the system. Now, why is this important? Well, if anything critical goes wrong or is corrupted, you can use your system restore point to go back maybe a day or 2 days and not necessarily have to roll back all the way to factory settings, which means all the customization you've done on your PC or laptop is not going to be lost. And some of us have been in our laptops for a year or more, and that is a lot of changes you have to realize that you've made. So System Restore and Shadow Copy are great tools. Readyboost is, well, I don't like to call things trash, but in my experience, Readyboost was kind of that. It's a performance enhancer in its core. It was supposed to take available room on external storage devices. So let's say you plug in a 16 gig USB and you're only using 5 gigs of that data or storage. That means you have 11 gigs left. So it would technically take that 11 gigs of room and use it to supplement the computer's memory and make it faster. That's kind of just not how it ever worked. Or if it did work that way, not to the point where I found it was useful or effective, and it was really just a headache because there was always a pop-up asking me if I wanted to ready boost my device. I finally just disabled it and let it go. So if it worked for you, I'm happy. I want to hear about how that worked for you. So share that on the Google wall, but I just never had a good experience with it. All right, let's make it through these last ones. Compatibility mode. It enables older applications or programs to run on newer versions of Windows, meaning if you have some software that was built for Windows Vista or Windows XP and you want to run it in Windows 7, 8, or 10, then you can go into the program's properties and tell it to use compatibility mode. You can go all the way back to Windows 95 with this. And this is great because buying new software every time an operating system updates gets really costly. So this can save you a headache. Windows XP mode is awesome. Now, if you have Windows 7, that means you actually have a full-blown, appropriately and properly of Windows XP. That means you are available to use a VM pretty much for free, and you can use all the software that was written for XP in Windows 7 without having to use compatibility mode or special software. You just use whatever's built in. You can literally open Windows XP in its own window, and you have 2 completely different operating systems running at the same time. Now, Windows Defender is Windows built-in anti-spyware software. I would highly suggest hardening your system by adding a third-party version to this. It's really nice that Windows gave us something for free, but it works as well as, well, something that's for free. All right, category and classic view are pretty simple. If you go into your control panel, and I'll actually open mine, you can see that there are 2 different views. Now, we grew up with this thing called classic view, which of course I don't have because I'm in Windows 10 right now, and it's just not in my defaults. But let me see. That's a little bit closer to what classic view would look like, where you have a lot of different options and they're per se the final option. So you open one of these and it actually goes to where you want it to go. So if I opened work folders, which I don't have set up on here, and you can go see just your work and shared folders per se. Category view. Perfect. You have these overall categories, kind of like umbrella categories. And you can go in to, let's say, appearance and personalization, and then you kind of drill down into the options you want. So if I want to drill down into my display, that's when my display options are going to start popping up. Not necessarily directly from when I click on and I'll do large icons here. If I wanted to go directly to display, I would just click on display and it would take me to that same screen. So it organizes it by categories, which is supposed to be more user-friendly. Now, if you're familiar with the control panel, you might want to just use the classic view because you know exactly where you're going. But if you're not necessarily as a techie or you're not as familiar, then category view is definitely going to help you navigate your settings. Your Action Center. This is a centralized point of contact for all the maintenance and security items in your operating system. So anytime something needs attention, according to Windows, you're going to have an Action Center notification. It might be something as simple as you have this new update, or it might have found some malware that it doesn't want on your computer and it's quarantining it. So whatever it may be, if it's a security or maintenance item, it will be listed in your Action Center. Whew. All right, that was a long list, but those are some really cool features and things that you need to know about for real life and your test. So let's talk about the different versions of Microsoft Windows itself. So even in one operating system, there are different versions or editions that an end user can purchase. Some are less expensive and have less features, and some are ridiculously expensive and have all the features, like the enterprise or professional versions. So in Windows 8, we have, no, let's just stay there for a minute. In Windows 8, we have this thing called RT. Now, it was only available as pre-installed on devices that use a 32-bit architecture, meaning this is kind of the lower end of things. It was less expensive and had less capabilities. It only supported or could address up to 4 gigs of RAM. So this isn't the fastest computer ever. This is really meant for really basic things. It came with Microsoft Office, but it only had certain apps, meaning it came with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and it did have OneNote, but that was about it. Now, your full-blown or normal Windows 8 is what was aimed for the home user. It came pre-installed on the majority of computers sold, and you could purchase it separately if you wanted to upgrade, and I don't know why anybody would have wanted to do that. But it had all the basic OS features and functions. It did not include Office, but you could definitely install it. It had the Windows App Store, so you could download different applications, and it supported 32 and 64-bit architecture. Now, Windows 8 Pro was aimed at the business user. So it was the first edition that enabled a system to become part of a server domain. And you could also remotely connect to these. So if you wanted to remote into your computer, you would need the Pro version. It also came with Hyper-V, meaning that you could have virtualization enabled and used group policy. So this is a lot of information. You're kind of like, why do I care about this? You should definitely be taking notes here because the different versions of Windows will be asked on your test as far as features and capabilities. But let's talk about real life here. When you go out to service somebody's issues and they have an operating system issue, well, one of the first things you need to know is what operating system are they even on, and are they capable of doing whatever the end user's trying to make it do? Meaning, if somebody wants to remote into their computer and they can't, do they even have the right Windows version to make that happen? So these are important pieces for your general knowledge for both your test and your real life career path, everything. All right, one last version for Windows 8. We're talking about enterprise here. It's meant for large organizations, and this is what allowed volume licensing, which means you could buy 100 copies or 1,000 copies, however many you needed for all of your devices. It has the same exact features and requirements as the Pro version, but you just buy a bunch of copies to be used across your entire enterprise. Now, Windows 7 had different versions as well, and I'll go through those a little faster. So go ahead and just write these down, and then I'll tell you the features. Windows 7 had Starter, Home Premium, Professional, Enterprise, and Ultimate. Now, Starter was the basic edition with very few features, and it was only available in 32-bit version. Now, all of those cool features we went through with Arrow, as far as the 3D flip, the screen preview, the shake, or the snap to the edges, none of those worked in Starter. It just couldn't handle that kind of features and graphical interface. Now, Home Premium was the low-cost edition for home users. It had all the basic OS functions, and you could get on the internet with it, and you could put a good amount of software on it, meaning all of Microsoft Office and other types of tools. Professional allowed you, or was the first version or edition, to have that Windows XP mode built in. You could connect domains here, and you could back up data to a network location. So it didn't necessarily have to be local or an externally connected hard drive. You could actually just back it up to a network server somewhere. The enterprise version was the volume licensing again, and this had all the features we've talked about, as well as multilingual user interface, which means you could put it in a bunch of different languages offered by Windows. It had BitLocker. You could, it's compatible with Unix applications, which is really, really cool if you're familiar with the applications available for Unix. And then the last one was Ultimate. It had the exact same features as Windows 7 Enterprise, but you could buy these one for one. So in Enterprise, you're buying hundreds or thousands of licenses, and you have all of these cool features. In Windows 7 Ultimate, that's for the individual power user. All right, one last list, and we're done with this part. Windows Vista. This came in Home Basic, Home Premium, Business, Enterprise, and Ultimate. Now, just like 7, these are really, really similar. Home Basic, low budget, not a lot of features. Home Premium, normal OS. It did have a media center built into it, and it supported HD TV, meaning it had an upgraded video card. You did have the arrow interface, or those cool user graphical interfaces here. Business had all the same features as Home, plus you could remote desktop, you could encrypt files with an EFS, or encrypting file system, and you could join a Windows Server domain. Enterprise was the business edition plus Unix application support and BitLocker, which is that full disk encryption, as well as the multilingual user interface with volume licensing. And Ultimate is the same as Vista Enterprise, and this was available for one-to-one purchasing. All right, so that's a lot of versions of Windows, but you just need to understand which ones were really inexpensive, which ones were super expensive, and the big feature per se between them. So don't stress on it too much, but definitely know what the unique part of them is. So Windows obviously is not the only operating system out there. We have Unix, we have Linux, and yes, Apple still exists, and they will for a very long time. Now, some of you have never heard of Unix or Linux, or you've heard of it, but you really had no idea what it was. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about Apple. So Unix is trademarked, and they have a family of operating systems. Now, they were originally developed at this place called Bell Laboratories way back in the 60s. So this has been around for a really long time. Now, they have what's called a kernel architecture, and that's really providing the core functionality and the interchangeable shells, which is the user interface. So it looks different from what we're used to in a Windows environment. But they have different shells that you could put on it. So you have one that actually looks like Windows, but you have one that looks like Apple, and then you have completely customized ones. So it's really cool. So the one thing that's unique with Unix is that it's quote unquote portable to different hardware platforms, meaning that you can use Unix on different. Now, if you understand that Apple is proprietary, meaning that you can only use Apple software on Apple hardware. It's meant to go together. And unless you know how to VM around those things, you're kind of stuck with that as a normal end user. Well, Unix didn't want that to be the case, so they allowed it to be used on pretty much every hardware platform. All right, Linux is going to be one of your favorites if you're going after any type of certified ethical hacking, or you just want to play around with some pretty cool systems. So Linux is what's called open standard, and it's a version of Unix per se, meaning it was developed from Unix and kind of just took off on its own. So what does open standard mean? Well, that means you can actually look at the core code and change pretty much anything you want. Now, you'll want to get to know what Linux is made of and how to make those changes before you go kill an operating system. But the source code is public, which means you can really customize this to any extent. All right, so let's talk about some of these Linux distributions and what the key features are. Now, because it's open code, you can download it, modify it, and install it for free. But a lot of organizations have actually purchased, customized beyond the normal means, beyond even stuff that I could do, and they're selling it now. And they're pretty cool versions. So Linux has this thing, or introduced this thing, called multiple desktops, which now Windows is incorporating as well, which means you have different desktops that you can actually use. Now, you have one desktop on your Windows system and you have applications and shortcuts all over it. And let's say you have a few windows open. Well, you could actually have another desktop in the background that has completely different set of windows open, and they won't necessarily talk to each other. Now, if you are in a Windows 10 environment, you have that option, and I'll show you how to get to it in a little bit. But if you have ever used this, even in Windows, you need to understand that Linux is actually the reason we have that, and it's using the Linux code to make it happen. So let's see if I can get this thing to pop up. All right, so let's put this down here in the corner. I don't want to interrupt your whole screen. I think I'm gonna have to. All right, take a look down here at my different taskbar application abilities. So this one right here in the corner is called Task View, and I'll pull that up. And if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see that I have Desktop 1 and Desktop 2. And if I open Desktop 2, I'll have a nice, clean desktop with no windows open, and I can go about my business on a whole different section as if I had a different computer. Now, why would I ever want to use that? Well, for me, I use it all the time to separate work and school stuff on the same computer. So I don't have to necessarily close all my windows or have 100 different things open. I can just open a different desktop and do all of my stuff for school, and then come back and go to the work desktop and continue on what I was working on before or after class. All right. Another cool thing they have is this thing called Keychain. And it's a feature in Linux that is different than Mac per se, because Mac actually has a keychain feature as well. So on the Linux side, it's a manager for all of the SSH traffic, meaning the secure shell agent, and it runs its own profile. So you don't have to know really the ins and outs of this, but you need to understand that it has some cool different tools. All right. So there's also this thing called iCloud. Well, hold on, that's totally an Apple thing, right? Well, you can actually access it from a Linux system now as well. So it has fully integrated itself into being able to access and support iCloud. Gestures on a Linux system is pretty much what we think of as a scrolling and tap gesture, but you can configure multi-touch gestures through different configuration files, which means we're pretty much stuck with how our touchpad works on our laptops right now. But if you wanted to completely customize that experience to be more friendly towards your gaming or customize third-party applications, you could totally do that from a Linux system. All right, now there's a huge list of stuff I could go through that's awesome about Linux, but we got to learn about Apple and move on. So we're just going to talk about OS X here. It's the operating system that is a Linux derivative, by the way, totally built on top of Linux. It has Unix-based operating system and GUI running behind it, but Apple customized it, and now it's the OS that's on Mac computers. So you, if you're an Apple user, know about Mission Control, Keychain, Spotlight, of course, iCloud and Gestures are there too. You have Finder, Remote Disk, Dock. Those are all things that were built in a Linux environment and then brought over to the Mac environment. So one thing I want to touch on here, if you haven't taken a note of already, is this thing called Boot Camp. Now, Boot Camp is an application that allows you to use Windows on a Mac. So you can switch between your OS X and your Windows OS back and forth using this thing called Boot Camp. It's pretty much the VM manager to make that happen in an Apple environment. All right, so let's talk about mobile operating systems. Everyone understands that Android pretty much rules the market and Apple's not horribly far behind. But Microsoft Windows 8.1 is something that we need to talk about here for our mobile operating systems. Now, I don't want you to think that BlackBerry doesn't exist, but they're going to focus on these three on your test, and that's why I want to talk about these the most. So some common features between all three is that you've got different buttons and sliders. It's going to respond to touch, and you're going to have GPS capabilities. You're going to have Wi-Fi connection. They all have mobile payment options. That's cool. We know how cell phones work. However, there are some things that are unique to each operating system. And let's start with iOS and talk about how it's closed source. That means that you can't really touch anything in the core source code of the operating system itself. That makes it a little safer per se because somebody can't go in and kind of just screw with the source code and make their own version and then include malware of some kind. But it makes it less fun because you can't really customize anything. And of course, iOS has Siri. All right. Android does have a virtual assistant. It actually has a few different options, and that's really, when I say a few different options, this is what makes Android so much, for me, better. It is, what's the word I want to use? Way more customizable per se. And the OS was developed in what's called an open source development app, which means you can open up the operating system and customize it a little bit. You can see the source code, and you can do that for apps as well, which means you can build apps and put them on the app market, and other people can buy them. And you don't have to be a major player in the market to do that. You could just build your first app and throw it on the Android market. So it's a little easier to jump into the development side of Android, whether it's on the OS side or in the app creation side. Now, when I was talking about the virtual assistant, I mean that Android has a version of Siri. They have lots of versions of Siri. You can download a third-party option and use it, or you can use what's called OK Google, which means if you actually just say OK Google and you have it enabled, your phone will listen to you, and then it'll even start listening to what the question is per se. Meaning you could ask what the weather is, you can ask it to search for something, and it's going to do exactly what Siri does. You'll be connected to the good info. All right. Last one to talk about is Windows 8.1. Now, this is a closed source OS just like Apple, and it has some built-in applications, but the app market is not nearly as extensive as the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, whatever that thing is called. It's Microsoft proprietary, meaning that Microsoft owns it and made it, and you can use this OS on a computer or tablet as well. So it's very similar to Windows 8 is what you had on the Windows 8.1 phone, meaning you had the tiles. Now they have a version of Siri as well, and she is called Cortana, and that kind of burns my buns because I was a big Halo fan before Microsoft screwed it up, but that's for a completely different conversation. So you know which ones are open source and closed source, and you know the name of the virtual assistants and some unique things about each OS. So that's awesome. Let's talk about the good stuff, which is authentication. How do we let the right user in the phone and keep everyone else out? All right, so mobile security is a big deal, and we're going to talk about it a few times. This is probably the second or third time we've touched on it. So you know the 3 factors of authentication, and here are some examples on how to use it in your phone. So who are you? Meaning I could ask, or I need to know that you're the right person. And authentication is a step of how can I tell that's who you are? Well, that's where the factors come in. Password or PIN or memorizing or knowing what the swipe feature, not the open swipe, but the actual pattern on your phone, those are all things that you know. Something that you have could be a physical item that you actually have to swipe by your phone. So if for any reason you have it hooked up where you have like a proximity tag to open your phone or tablet, then that's a something you have factor. And something you are in the mobile device most likely is going to be your fingerprint. So that's the biometrics that you'll use. Once you input whatever required information to open the phone, well, that's how we know that you've been authorized, meaning, okay, you are the right person, or you were denied authorization, which means you're not the right person and you don't get to access that data. Cool. So let's jump back into PCs. Now we looked at mobile operating systems and we started at PC operating systems, and we're going to jump back here to local users and groups, meaning the user accounts and groups that are configured on your computer. Now this was used in Windows 7 and the Server 2008 and 2012 versions. And these are local, meaning the computer that you're on. You can't jump on another computer and have the same local users and groups information because, again, they're local. I don't know how else to explain that one. All right. Permissions and rights can be assigned to a local user or a group on the specific computer, and they can actually have different permissions on a different computer. And this is how much access they have to files and folders, printers, and other shared resources. So what kind of accounts and groups are we looking at? Well, we've looked at this before, so this is kind of going to be a quick review where you have admin accounts, standard accounts, and what these things are called child accounts. Child accounts are unique to Windows 8, and they're very similar to a guest account in Windows 7. So admin accounts give you the most control. Standard accounts are for day-to-day activities, and you can't necessarily delete any critical files and change any settings. So if you're going to attempt to do that, you're going to need admin rights. And child accounts allow parents or somebody who's trying to monitor or limit computer usage to put in different family settings and safety settings. One of the accounts that should probably be disabled if you're not using it. Now in Windows 7, you have an administrator, a standard user, and a guest. So again, admin, complete control. Standard user, most control, but not able to uninstall or install hardware and change any major operational or security settings, as well as not able to delete system files. And guest is limited access. Again, you should be completely shutting that type of account access down if you're not using it. All right, UAC, access or user account control. This is an enhanced security feature from Windows Vista and later that looks at limiting the privileges of even a standard user. This is the window that pops up when you're trying to do something that you don't have access to. And if you are an admin using a standard account, you just give it permission to continue. If you're not the admin, then you need to go get the admin so that you can continue with whatever you're doing. This is a good stop to stop you from installing malicious things on your computer or making mistakes that are to critical system files. All right, group accounts. There are a few different words I want you to have here verbiage-wise. Again, admin is admin. When you create an admin account, it's created during the installation of Windows. That's the very first account that you create, and then you create user accounts. And these are for your day-to-day tasks, which means you have a little bit less control, but you can still do everything you need to get your job done. Guest accounts, limits or restrictions per se, and should be disabled for security reasons. Now, event logs are literally just a log or a record of pretty much every single thing that happens in your computer. When someone logs in, when they open an application, when they get an error, all these things are logged. And of course, remote desktop lets you log into one system from another system remotely, so anywhere in the world. System files are the files that are required for your operating system to function with all of its capabilities. Now, normally these files are hidden because if you delete them, it can prevent your computer from working properly. So the file extension and the location of the file are in a system hierarchy per se, which means there's going to be a parent folder and subfolders to that. Now, and directory are interchangeable here for the the system or file hierarchy. But this is really only for system files where we'll call them directories. What else do you need to know here? No, that's pretty much it. Oh, a quick note that has nothing to do with your test, but if you want to name a file something very, very, very specific, you have 255 character limits for your entire file path. So two things that will restrict you here. One, if you want to put a file in a file in a file in a file in a file and have this huge subtree, you have to be aware or consider how long the file names are going to be, because at some point you're going to run out of characters. Name something very specifically, meaning if you want to name a folder something like, this folder is for important system files, please do not touch or delete anything. Characters if you type it all out, and at some point you're going to go over that 255 character limit. Random note, but good to know. Windows Explorer is the little manila icon. This is what lets us interact with all the folders and then dive into the files and open them. Pretty simple. It's called File Explorer in Windows 8 and 8.1, and you'll notice has very square edges and kind of weird colors. I've seen green, like a seafoam type green. This one is a golden yellow kind of color. So I'll back up to our, you'll see the rounded edges, which is how you can tell it's 7. And then if you move forward into File Explorer, those square edges and the brighter color is how you can tell it's 8. Just a simple way. All right, you have computer in Windows 7, which we used to call it My Computer, so they just took computer off. And then in Windows 8, you have what's called This PC. Why are they changing this? Well, I seem to think that they're doing it to be evil, to make us remember more things, but I don't really know the real reason. Nonetheless, make sure that you're familiar with what the different words are so that, well, let me change that. Make sure you understand that this is all the same exact thing. We're just opening My Computer, and it has different names. And if you're opening just a file, the little manila icon, it can be called different things in Windows 7 versus 8. So let's get to some things that don't necessarily change. File attributes. These are characteristics that are associated with a file or folder, and they let the OS know important information about that file or folder when you go to use it. So if it's archived, that means that the file has not been backed up. Okay, if it's hidden, that means it's hidden. Read-only, pretty straightforward. It's a read-only file. Can't necessarily interact with the contents of it. S means that it's a system folder, and I means that it's indexed. Index means it's, this is like a Windows specific attribute that allows Windows indexing service to create an index of the file per se to speed up the search function. You do not need to understand the complexities of that quite yet. What you do need to understand is that we have different file extensions for different types of documents, and those help our operating system know how to open that file. So if you see on screen here, we have .doc, which is the older version of a Word document. .docx is the newer version, so it's going to have different features and functions. .txt is a text file, so it's going to open in Notepad. .exe is an executable file, which means it's going to access actual script and instructions and start something within an application. You have system files that are .sys, .xls or xlsx are Excel files, and there's a lot of examples here that we could go on and on, but you need to understand what file extensions are used. And you need to also understand that if you change the file extension, which you totally can do, then your computer's going to try and interact with it differently. Talked about those file attributes. Sorry for not having them on screen, but again, archived, hidden, read-only, system, and index files. And if you want to take notes, go ahead and pause here, but I'm going to move on to interfaces. So a UI, or user interface, is just the thing that we see. And what you're looking at here are the graphical user interface for Windows 8 and the CLI, or command prompt, for Windows 8. And they're going to look different from 7 to 8 and even in 10. Now there are different types of tools that we can use in Windows. Again, you just saw the CLI or command prompt screen. You definitely should have used that by now. But there are other tools that we can use that are considered GUI tools, which means not command prompt. And what else does that mean? It means they're prettier to look at and easier to interact with for people that are not necessarily comfortable with the command prompt. User interface is what GUI stands for. MMC that you see up here stands for Microsoft Management Console, which are the windows that you open to manage your devices. So computer management, device management, all those things where you would manage the different things that are connected to your computer. I know that's vague, but there's a lot of options there. All right. Now we have Windows tools, we also have Linux tools, and we're going to touch on Apple tools. So Linux tools include backup and restore, and image recovery, which is awesome, disk maintenance, you can screen share, and they have application management. Now, most of those are actually going to be covered in detail when we hit Linux, but these are the ones that you would encounter most often as a tech when you need to service a Linux OS. So most Linux tools, I need you to know, are command line based, and some of them have GUI options, but you're really going to have to be comfortable with the command line to service a Linux environment. OS X tools run mostly on the GUI, not mostly from the command line interface, but you can access them from either side. Now you have the exact same list here as you did with Linux because OS X was built on top of Linux. So same stuff. All right, that was a lot of info. I want you to take it in. You might want to rewatch this video and take some really good notes. But you have learned an immense amount about different types of operating systems. You probably knew most of that stuff about Windows because, well, we've been using Windows forever. And if you're an Apple computer owner, then you're definitely familiar with the Apple tools. But I don't know if you knew that everything was built on top of a Linux system, Windows included. I say a lot about Apple being built on top of it, but just as many features in Windows are Linux-based as well. So don't get freaked out if you ever need to service somebody's computer who doesn't have a Windows environment if you're a Windows person. And don't get freaked out if you have to jump into Windows from being an Apple user. There's lots of features, but most of it's the same across the board. They're just in different places or have different names. I do want you to familiarize yourself with the different features in the different Windows operating systems, meaning 7, 8, 8.1, and Vista, as well as the different versions of each or editions, meaning the Home Basic and Starter. Then you have your Pro and Enterprise and Ultimate. Look through those things, make flashcards out of them. You will definitely get some questions on those during your practice tests. You might come across them on your real test, but for real life, people have different operating systems, and you have got to be familiar with those environments to be able to efficiently make it through a troubleshooting process. All right, I'll see you soon. Take notes and be successful.